back to What the Fertility Season 3. This morning, we are so excited to sit down and chat with the one and only Kelsi Wallace. Many of you may know her on Instagram as the Wallace Chronicles. This episode is especially exciting as Kelsi has walked a very similar path and journey to Amanda through embryo adoption. So Kelsi is a respected embryo adoption advocate, and we just cannot wait to hear your whole story. Welcome.
Thank you so much. That's so sweet. I'm really excited to join you guys. So I really appreciate the opportunity to tell our story. I guess just to jump right into it, going back to like as a child, you get your cycle normally and whatever, and then mine kind of just went away. And so I ended up getting like on birth control young to have a cycle. And I always kind of knew deep down in my gut that something was just not right. I was always going to have issues or whatever. So that's kind of always just been there. And then when I met Spencer, my husband. Oh, and we live in Seattle or across the water from Seattle anyway. But so going to anything, we have to travel quite a bit. So when I met Spencer, I told him right when we first started dating, it was kind of like, hey, I probably am going to have an issue trying to get pregnant right up front. And he's like, you're fine. Like, you don't even know
Right.
that we haven't even like tried anything. It's been like a week we're dating. So I've always just kind of known in my gut. Um, and so we started trying pretty much right away. And nothing happened for like a year, typical. So I ended up going to a fertility clinic in Tacoma, Washington. And we just did like the regular, normal first appointment stuff where they checked everything. I found out I had PCOS, and we just did like the normal first steps of things, and nothing ever worked out. And then I also just really felt like advocating for myself there. It wasn't getting anywhere, it wasn't doing anything. I ended up leaving that clinic and going to the same branch, but to a different one in downtown Seattle. We ended up doing 3 IUIs there, and none of that worked.
Oh, that
And
was quick too. So you're kind of like, I just don't think this is going to work. And PCOS is somewhat difficult to get diagnosed with, right? Don't you have to have multiple kind of symptoms?
yeah, so I guess I'm not hugely versed in it, but I know there's like a bunch of different types of PCOS, right? And
Yeah.
I had like that generic string of pearls in my ovaries. Everything else, my obviously lack of cycle is a huge one.
Right. Right.
But so yeah, it was a interesting to learn that because I always knew something was wrong. So I was like, oh, okay, that's it. That's gonna be an easy fix.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Easy fix. We'll do IUI. They can kind of time us out. We know we're ovulating. So you said you did 4?
3.
3. Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
Okay. And then that doesn't work and you're probably like super frustrated.
Yeah, yeah, it was because you think, immediately you're like, okay, we're at the fertility clinic. This is gonna be easy. We're gonna get there. Like, this is awesome. And then it's like a failed after a failed after a failed. And it's like, okay, well, I guess our next step is IVF and we can't afford that. So
Right.
that's kind of where that led. But the same thing kind of happened with that same clinic is I just felt like a number there. I just wasn't being heard or like all of myself advocating just wasn't being read at all by them. And that's one thing I could tell anyone that's starting fertility treatments or like anything is to always follow your gut and self advocate. I feel like it's so huge, and so many people, it's scary, and it's scary because a lot of you, especially when you first start out, you don't know,
Like anything about
especially.
stuff. Yeah. And you're kind of like not want to say talking back to a physician, but you're like, I understand what you're saying, but this is what's going on in me. And sometimes like it sounds like the clinic you were at is just not super receptive to that. And then when you do find the physician that's receptive to that, you're like, oh my gosh, this was here all along. This is what I should have been doing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what happened. I ended up doing a little research, and we found my third and final clinic, and we went there. The only problem is it's about a 2-hour trip to get there. Worth it. And we ended up doing 2 rounds of IVF. The first round of IVF, I thought everything was going great, but my ovaries were literally touching each other in the ultrasounds. I was so full, and they're like, we're good, we're gonna get a lot of eggs, we're gonna make embryos, like you're great. And I went in, so the day before retrieval, you go in for all of your blood work to make sure everything looks great. I went in, got back to work, and I got the phone call, and they're like, I'm so sorry, Kelsi, we have to cancel your egg retrieval tomorrow. I was like, what are you talking about?
Oh my
What?
God.
Your estrogen plummeted and you lost everything. So the 50 eggs that they saw literally touching each other just depleted. And we found out my body wasn't absorbing any of the estrogen through the patches or suppositories, like at all. My body just wasn't absorbing it. So that was a shocker to go through the very first round of IVF, doing all the shots. You're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so great. The day before we go in, it's just like total shutdown.
That's
And so that was rock
Oh.
hard. Huh?
Yeah, that's devastating. And I mean, and so again, just linking PCOS, typically women with PCOS do have like 40, 50 eggs. And so
Right.
you're probably thinking the egg retrieval is not going to be the problem. It's going to be like the
Yeah.
actual transport.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, so that was a really big shocker for us. Another learning curve, another being like, okay, my body is failing me again. This is great. Like,
So did
come
they
on, we're
say
supposed
like,
to be here.
yeah, did they say like, go ahead and maybe like have sex at home, try it home, like, or is it just, it's over and you
It
gotta.
was, I'm so sorry. We'll make a follow-up call with you. And you can come in and we can talk about the next step. And I was just like, that was so hard. So I remember Spencer and I, do you guys know that game? It's like in bars, it's like Golden Tee Golf. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I'm trying.
Oh.
It's like a West Coast thing. What is it?
It's like one of those computer games in a bar that you just roll the ball and you're like golfing. But I remember I got the call. I was like, I told work, I'm like, I gotta go. I am mentally checked out.
Yeah.
Tell Spencer,
Going
and
to
I'm
the
like,
bar.
yeah, like we're gonna go get a drink and we're gonna play Golden Tee Golf right now.
I love it.
think that's what we
That's
did.
how I respond. I'm like, I
Yeah.
need a drink.
Give me a glass of wine and
100%.
something to take my mind off of this. So that's what we did, and that's kind of how I got through it, quote unquote, until we had that follow up.
I was gonna ask, just for listeners that may or may not have had a failed IVF cycle, you still have to pay the $5,000 to $6,000 in meds. I mean, there's nothing that you really didn't pay for except for the retrieval, I guess.
Right. So I think in total, it was basically flushed down the toilet about almost $20,000. And because you still have to pay for it up front as a full package, you don't, even if you don't have the retrieval, you're paying it at the clinic as a package. But luckily they took that off the next cycle for us, the retrieval part. So that was really helpful. But God, it's crazy.
Yeah, so you go in for your follow-up and they're like, we're gonna try this again, or how did they kind of handle that?
Yeah, I was gung-ho. I was like, okay, well, what can we do to make sure that I'm like my estrogen doesn't do that again? And they're like, well, you're gonna do injections. So that's how we knew, okay, I'm gonna start doing intramuscular injections into my arm every 3 days rather than doing the patches, which I was so glad about because the patches sucked so bad. So that's kind of where we went with that. We went through an entire other round of IVF. We retrieved 24 eggs and 3 fertilized and 1 made it to day 6, and it struggled to get to day 6. So every single day after, we were like, okay, are we gonna have anything out of this? And we ended up freezing it and then thawing, which my doctor told us to when we went in for that transfer. He's like, okay, well, it's a day 6 and it kind of had an issue getting there. So we don't know if it's going to survive the thaw. And so I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And it's like all those things. you don't understand until you actually go through it, like all of the things that actually could go wrong, because you see so many success stories and you're like, oh, this is gonna be it.
Yeah, like it's just straightforward. You do the retrieval, you get your embryos, you transfer. And like Amanda and I both, I sound similar to your story, getting one embryo. And it's like, and then Amanda's story, and she can like share with you, but it's like you never think you're going to be at the day of the transfer, and that's not an option for you. Like it's just, it's not something you think about until it happens.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So we ended up going in and he walked up to us. He's like, it survived. And I was like, thank God. And then we did the transfer and then that failed. And so we get the call and it's like, I'm so sorry, which I kind of already knew. I'm a home tester,
Same.
like
Same.
psychopath.
Yeah. Like what, like 4 days later?
Yes.
Literally.
It's gonna change every hour. I know it. So I was just doing that. And then, same sort of thing. I was like, Spencer, I need a glass of wine. We need to like go do something, like get out of town, figure out, and you have your own like little things where you have to escape reality. And it's kind of what we did. And that's kind of what leads into our whole other totally twist of a story.
Yeah, I'm so excited because I didn't know that. I went through your Instagram because we started following you maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. And I think at that point, at least 3 years ago, you had already moved into embryo adoption, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I missed this whole first part. So this was super interesting for me to hear. And I think too, like, yeah, when you have failed IVF, the average person thinks, well, that was it. There are really no other options. So I'm sure like when you're saying like go on vacation, like try to do something that you have control over and then really figure out like what's next, because like we do want to keep going, but what are our options?
And that's exactly where we're at. And so Spencer and I talked about adoption, and that's where we were fully at. I was like, okay, well, obviously my egg quality is crap. My doctor told me, he's like, Kelsi, I don't really know what to tell you other than I think you have very, very poor egg quality. Adoption might be a great path. Like that, it wasn't okay, let's try this, let's do this. It was, I'm sorry. Like this is kind of, and so Spencer and I were really like, okay, we just want to have a family. So if it's adoption, whatever, that's fine. Let's go down that path. Let's put it out there that we're looking to adopt. And, so I ended up getting a DM from a gal that had followed me on Instagram for a while. And it was a Kelsi, I'm bumping this up again so you see my message. And she had been writing me, but I just kept missing her messages. And it was Erin, and she's like, this is going to sound crazy. And you don't know who I am, but I want to donate my embryos to you. And I paused and I was like, what is that? Because I really didn't know much about embryo adoption or donation at all. So before I even like got back to her, I told Spencer, I'm like, we said adoption, like this is kind of the same thing. Really, it is, but I could like experience pregnancy and we can give these embryos a chance at life. And at first, I think any guy struggles with the fact that, it's a providing thing. It's like, well, I'm not really doing anything then, like at this point. So he kind of struggled with the fact at first, and then he was like totally on board. And I messaged her back. I'm like, okay, well, how how do we do this then?
Yeah.
Wait, this is wild. So Kelsi, were you already sharing your infertility journey online and she had been watching?
Yeah, so I actually started my Instagram, the Wallace Chronicles, back in 2017 at the end of my first clinic experience, because I was struggling and needed a community so bad. And like I was back then too, like hashtags were huge, right? So I was like searching every hashtag and like, okay, there's a lot of people on here who get it.
Me too. I was like recurrent pregnancy loss, and I would just only search the hashtags, and that's how. And even through our adoption journey that failed, like I would type in like the agency we were using, and like go try to find other moms and watch to see if they ended up adopting. So I would totally agree.
Yeah, so that's kind of where we're at, and I was just searching everything, and then that's how I created this. So this is like my God, like this is like, okay, if I never, and regardless of anybody's belief, this is like my belief that if I never started this
Yeah.
Instagram and shared my story, like Aaron would have never found us, and we would never have crew, and like all these things,
True.
like always it was all meant to be in the long
Yeah.
run.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that. I love, and I hate like that everything happens for a reason, but I love bringing purpose out of like what's happened to you and what you've walked through. And like, I have very similar feelings. Like you brought purpose out of your hard experience, try to share and connect with others. And then this came to you and oh, I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
So you tell
Yeah, out
Aaron
of
like,
the ashes, for sure.
yeah, you tell Aaron like, okay, what do we do?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I was like, okay, so like, what's the next steps? And she's like, I don't know. And we just kind of figured it out together. She is just the most selfless, amazing person in the world. We ended up just kind of figuring it out together. And I talked to Erin and I was like, okay, well, talk to your clinic. I'll talk to my clinic. And what I didn't realize is a lot of clinics don't accept outside embryos. Amanda, did you go through your clinic for your, so
No,
I don't
we
really know
traveled
like
to another so we traveled to another state for them. And so we just left them in that state. So we just go there because like it was just a lot to have to bring them into North Carolina. So I just go to Michigan.
wow, okay, that's so cool.
But I ran up against that as well. So I went after Amanda had success with her embryo adoption, I was still struggling to conceive myself and we were starting the adoption process. And so when I had reached out to the clinic that I absolutely adore, they would not, that you could only adopt the embryos that they had in their bank. And so
Yeah.
that was really hard because Amanda had made a Facebook connection and I saw, women like you that had made these one-off connections, but then the clinics are like, well, you have to use ours. So is that something that you kind of ran up against?
Well, no, I got really lucky. My clinic was like, oh yeah, okay, so we just need to know the process. But if I was still with my other clinic, they wouldn't have accepted them.
Yeah.
So, like that's another thing. It's like, and I always, and by the way, like to reverse a little bit, my third clinic, it's the most seen I've ever felt at somewhere. Like, and I just wish every clinic was like that. And it just sucks to know there's so many people still going to certain clinics that I'm like, you don't even understand. It could be so much better. Like,
Yeah.
anyway,
Really true.
yeah. And I spoke with Erin, and then she talked to her clinic, and at the time, so they had moved to Texas, and her embryos are still in St. Louis. And so she called her old clinic. It's like, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. And they're like, well, we need a, ownership legal contract. So I found a surrogacy lawyer in Seattle, and I messaged her and I was like, this is a weird scenario. This isn't surrogacy. And she was like, oh yeah, I've done embryo adoption. I've done embryo donation. I have like a contract that you can look at and see if you like, and we can like change it as needed. It's like, okay. So I like looked at it and I sent it to Erin. I'm like, I want you to let me know what you're most comfortable with, because we wanted to be very open with everything. I don't want it to be closed off. I want crew to know who they are and all of that stuff. But, so we came up to an agreement on everything and then went through that legal process contract. We notarized it, sent it off to Erin. Her and her husband notarized it, and that's it. It's a ownership transfer. It's like buying a car. Like it's this weirdest thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, now what? And it's 2020, it's the middle of the pandemic, and we're like, we got to ship him to our clinic. So I find this guy and I only talked to him through Gmail. My clinic, the gal that was the nurse there was like, okay, Kelsi, I'm telling you this, like in private, but this is my friend, he can do this. And so I contacted him and he's like, yeah, all right. Here's your FedEx shipping number.
Oh
So I
my.
like picked him up and got on a plane, like with them.
And
Stop.
so like, Drew has the cool story. He was frozen. He was flown by FedEx plane during the pandemic to cross the United States. Yeah. And so that's kind of how that all worked out. And it was just such a bizarre thing. And it was like $700. I know people are like really curious on the price of things to do that. And that, I mean, it's straight across the US. So our clinics had to talk to each other though, to make sure that pickup time, because if they could only be like, I really don't know the science behind any of that, I know that, you know, shipping and then making sure they're back into like their environment they need to be in. Everything had to line up perfectly for that. So that was all done. And then they made it to our clinic and that was it. And it was so crazy to think that it all happened. And once it was all done, I'm like, okay, now what?
So you just have these embryos and you're like, oh my gosh, like now we can
Yeah.
get the transfer part and like actually do this possibly. Like that's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we ended up getting 4 embryos. And once they were shipped, Spencer and I went out to dinner and we're sitting at dinner and I'm like, we don't know because they're all PGS tested. It's the only way I think that our clinic would actually accept them is to know that they've been tested and they were like healthy. And I'm like, we don't know the genders of any of them. Do you want to know? And Spencer's like, I don't know. Do you want to know? I'm like, I don't know. So
prior, that's so interesting. Oh my gosh, that's so cool that you like adopted them and you didn't even know the genders. I love that.
I was all like, okay, this is our opportunity. Like, let's do it. And then we're sitting there like, oh wait, I'm kind of curious.
Yeah.
And so we ended up texting Erin at dinner that night, and I was like, hey, so it doesn't matter, but we're kind of curious. And she just texted me back 4 blue hearts. And so we knew that they're all boys. And that was just like the coolest thing.
You and Amanda have the
I
same.
adopted 3 boys. So
Yay! I love that. That's so awesome.
That is such a special moment, like being at dinner and having like your gender reveal. And especially, and I think Amanda can relate, when it's all one gender, now you know.
Oh yeah.
Like it's not
Yeah.
like, ooh, but now
So
we
cool.
can pick one. Yeah.
Yep.
You're just
Exactly.
my momhood. It's the best.
Yeah. I can love it. So that was really awesome. And then we went into our first transfer, which was canceled like mid-cycle because it was COVID. So
Oh no.
the very, very first case happened in Washington State across the parking lot from my clinic.
Oh my
Oh my
God.
God.
It was like,
So this is like an early February, March cancellation.
I was starting, so as they were being ready to be shipped, I was starting the process for the transfer. So it was going to be boom, 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 boom. So I was starting birth control. It's like, okay, like let's get this show on the road. And then Spencer's like, I don't know. I think we're gonna be shut down across the world. And I'm like, no, we're not. Like this is crazy.
Yeah, because it was unprecedented.
Sure enough,
So
my clinic
yeah,
shut down.
everybody's like, this might have last 2 to 3 weeks. Like we don't know, it'll pass. And then we all know what happened.
Yeah, I know. So, I always think every cancellation is like the worst thing in the world, but like there's some reason behind it. My body must have, also needed a little bit of time or whatever. And then once we were able to get back in there finally, we transferred, and that's my son Crew, who is now 3.5.
Wow, it worked the first time.
Yeah, so he's 3.5 now, and that has been such an insane blessing, like craziness. And it's hard to even believe that it's still real. The weirdest, craziest thing too is I feel like Crew is Spencer's little twin, and it's a nature versus nurture thing. It's like so bizarre. So that's kind of where we were then, and then fast forward to April of this year, we decided to transfer again. And then I got really sick in the middle of doing all of the transfer meds and had pneumonia and had to cancel mid doing all of the medications. And that was really frustrating. And then once again, I'm like, okay, my body probably just obviously it's not ready to transfer. It sucks. It's waste of money. Then we started it all over again, and and now I'm pregnant because the transfer worked. So that's just
Oh,
insane. But
well, congratulations. That's so exciting.
thank you. It's just been like it's hard to believe it's real. It's hard to, I mean, obviously it is, right? But when you go through so much for so long, since 2016, and finally getting through in 2021 when he was born, it's just like, it's so hard to like grasp it, but it's like so exciting. And I don't know, it's just a whirlwind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Amanda and I were just saying this on an episode. I don't think it's come out yet, but like you look at your kid and you're like, are they, and they could be like two, Amanda's son's 3, my daughter's 2. And we're like, are they real? Like, is
Yeah.
this like, or you see them playing with your spouse and you're like, am I really here? Like, what's going on? Yeah, I totally get it. And it sounds like even in your situation, it was taking you so long to process like crew because you waited a while to transfer. And I know Amanda and then I waited a while to try again too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so crazy to think about. It actually worked because you go through so many fails and it's like, okay, who's punking me? Come out, Dax. Like, where are you at?
Right. And this is what I love so much about embryo adoption. Like you're a perfect example. Amanda's a really great example of like you go through all this failure, you have such poor results, but then like your first transfer, boom, like your body was ready. You can carry a pregnancy. And like how beautiful is that? I had a horrific pregnancy, so not something I'd love to do if I couldn't get pregnant. But both you and Amanda, like first transfer, awesome. And then you get to carry your
That's so,
baby.
yeah, that's just so crazy. And then Amanda, I don't really know it fully. It was your issue, like all egg quality as well, or
Yeah, I have like low, like diminished ovarian reserve. So like my AMH was super, super low. And so
yeah.
we did IVF and we just always got like abnormal embryos. So I never got to even go to transfer. So then
Ugh.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel you. Yeah, it's so crazy. And I just love the fact that embryo adoption's an option.
Especially because I feel like it was set for me at least. And I know I'm sure probably for you as well, of like, yes, I was ready to totally do traditional adoption. Like in a second, I just wanted a family, but I still was also grieving the fact that I never was going to experience pregnancy or do or breastfeed or get those bump pictures that you like dream about. And so
Yeah.
then realizing like, oh my gosh, I actually can still do that and still do adoption. Like it's just it for us was the best of both worlds.
Yep. Yep. Totally. 100%. It's just like the craziest thing. And I've had a lot of people message me and be like, hey, because you've told your story, which is why I'm like such a huge advocate to tell your story when you're battling infertility, no matter where you're at in your process, because there's somebody out there that's going to hear your story and it's going to encourage them in some way. And I have gotten so many messages of people saying, hey, because you've shared your embryo adoption, I have donated my embryos to my clinic, we're anonymous, or I found somebody and we've donated and they just had their first kid, or like there's so many amazing stories that I've heard. And I'm just like, that is the entire reason of wanting to share. And it's scary to share. It's terrifying because there's a lot of not very nice people out there that like to say terrible things. Or have different beliefs.
Yeah, I was gonna say, especially on your platform too, as you get bigger and bigger, I'm sure, and Amanda and I like have experienced it a little bit, but you do get like those hateful messages, and I'm sure it feels like, okay, I don't want to share my story anymore. Like this is my life. I want to protect my family. But then you get the really amazing stories where that's not even just like a nice message. That is like, I assisted bringing life into this world. You
Yeah.
found like
Literally.
it's huge. Yeah. And Amanda's received similar messages. Like, I heard your story on the podcast and like we decided it helps convince my husband because Amanda's had her husband on to talk about the male perspective. And it's like,
I love that.
my husband to be on board. And now we have our son. And it's insane. We're bringing like life into the world.
It's so beautiful. It's so amazing. And it's just mind blowing. And, I wish there was more people out there like advocating for it more. I feel like it's finally more people are really talking about it, but I feel like for a long time too, it was kind of like a not really talked about. And I don't know why. I think maybe because, obviously it's a different path or whatever, and some people are not encouraging of it, depending on you know, religious beliefs or whatnot. I know that there's a lot of flack from every corner of the world, but I think it's just incredibly beautiful, and a chance, like you had mentioned, you can still adopt. You're giving these embryos a chance at life, which is amazing, and you get to experience the pregnancy part of it, and it's just beautiful. And you know, I get asked a lot too, where do you feel like he's yours? I'm like, huh? Yeah, he's my kid. Like,
100% mine. Yeah.
yeah. You know, it's funny, especially when people are just trying to understand it, which I get, because if you don't go through something, especially infertility as a whole, if you don't go through it, like, you really don't understand it. And I learned that, you know, growing up, I knew a couple of people that had experienced or were experiencing infertility, and I just had no idea what they were going through. And I was like, oh, well, you're going to be fine. Like, it's going to be great. And they probably hated me so much for saying,
Yeah, totally get it.
yeah, you know, it comes back around. And I was like, if, you know, just go on vacation, Kelsi, put your feet in the air. Like, I want to punch you in the throat.
Yeah, I'm the same. Like, before I had heard of like friends or family members like having a miscarriage, I'm like, you'll be okay. Like, you can have another. And then like when you go through it yourself, you're like, whoa, that is just not something you can get over. So, okay, I wanted to ask you, because I actually saw you just shared this. Someone had reached out to you, and I think that a lot of people, this is the coolest thing in my opinion, is that when you have embryo adoption, if you adopt multiples, your children will be biologically related. And I think you just got that question. So I don't know
Yeah.
if you want to talk on that. And I know Amanda's in a similar situation with her embryos.
Yeah, it's so it's amazing because, you know, the embryos are coming from a man and a woman that created embryos for their own IVF, and instead of discarding them, we adopted them. So they are 100% genetically related, same DNA, which I love the fact that if, you know, our donors have two kids of their own, eventually one day, if something were to happen, they can all help each other out medically. They all have the same DNA. They can help each other, which Erin and I have talked about. Like, that's such an amazing thing that they'll always have, like, each other. And it's interesting because I actually had another gal reach out to me when I posted that question and I answering it. And she said, I never thought about asking one of my mates when I looked at them and their kids, oh, same husband? Like, yes.
I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is so true.
Isn't that so funny? Like, you don't go up to your best friends and be like, your kids, man, they look a little bit different. Is that, you know, from the same husband or?
That is gold star. That's like the best. You probably were just like, hell yeah. Like, that's
Oh
such
my
a
gosh, I was laughing so hard. Like, that's so spot on. So
it's so
true.
true. And I think that just highlights even more like how much people just like, because it's not a mainstream thing and because it hasn't been talked about, like they just poke holes into the process, not just embryo adoption, IVF, all of it. That's
Yeah.
I love that you shared that.
That's so good.
It's so funny, and it was so spot on. And I was like, oh my gosh, that really sums it up to exactly how I'm feeling. Because really, you know, here I am pregnant again. It's from the same batch of embryos, and people are like, which I understand. It's hard to grasp the concept if you haven't been through it, if they're genetically related, or if it's from the same man, thinking, because a lot of people who don't understand the process really assume maybe it's like just an egg and then whatever. But I just thought that comment was like so funny and so true. And I'm like,
So
well, now I
true.
kind of want to go up to everybody and be like, same husband.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing everything. I think, I guess my last question would just be like, especially because you're so, such an advocate for embryo adoption, like if someone was at the point, let's say where you and Amanda were, where you have really exhausted your options with, you know, assisted reproduction with your own eggs, own sperm, what kind of advice would you give for them if they're just kind of getting their toes wet with embryo adoption?
Yeah, there's just a lot of different avenues of information out there. There's a lot of different, like, gosh, Empower. What's her name? Hold on, I gotta look it up. Um, did you guys ever, when you were first starting, watch like YouTube to like different videos or whatever?
So my journey started January of 2020. So I feel like Instagram it was not, I mean, there was slim out there on Instagram, but it was picking up. And like, I feel like I could find enough through there. I think Amanda, yours was a couple years before me.
Yeah. No, I like didn't really get on the internet with like all of it. I feel like until a little bit like later. I feel like
Okay.
so I don't think I really, I mean, I wasn't really like on YouTube much now.
But it's funny how it
So
changes because
I
now it's on
know,
TikTok.
obviously
Like
now,
my
yeah.
sister-in-law now just sends me all the stuff she finds on TikTok. I'm like, wow, that would have been useful.
Yeah, so true. Oh my goodness.
it's so true. Well, there's this gal that I was following on YouTube and learning her story, and she ended up doing embryo adoption. And that's kind of like the first I ever really kind of heard about it. And that was way before we even started at a reproductive endocrinologist, like
Yeah.
That's
way before.
isn't that
Well, now
crazy?
she has a,
Breadcrumbs.
yes, exactly. That's what I feel like everything is like when you really look back at your whole
God
long
has
story.
care in your heart for sure.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. She started this Empower with Moxie where they do matching. So, and she's a huge, huge advocate. She is full of information for recipients and donors, which is just great because I know we'll be eventually donating the remaining two once our Beckett arrives healthy in her arms. I definitely want to be able to like donate our remaining two because we're going to be done. And I know it's easier for me because we were donated them and I know the beautiful, the miracle behind it and everything. But I can imagine being on the other side and having to get the courage in order to do that. And so she really, really helps a lot with all of that information.
Is she still on YouTube or does she have an Instagram or?
Instagram, yeah, if you look up Empower with Moxie.
Okay, we'll tag it in the show notes.
Yeah, and then there's also embryo donation support, and she does a lot as well with information, but then there's also Facebook groups out there of people who are looking, and there's a lot of just things to get more information and just like always follow your gut. I think that's huge. It's so hard to like know what you're supposed to do, and I feel like your gut's constantly yelling at you if you just listen to it.
I love
But
that.
yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being on and just like sharing your entire story. And obviously with embryo adoption, like it's dear to my heart. So
Yeah, I love
thank you
that.
for coming on and sharing your whole story.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on here. And I just hope that, if anyone ever has questions, I'm an open book. So if anyone wants to ask anything, feel free. I am here and I would love to just continue to share our story and be a huge advocate for embryo adoption because it's truly life-changing.
Thanks, Kelsi. And you can find Kelsi it's the Wallace Chronicles. Is there an underscore somewhere in there?
Yeah, the Wallace Chronicles with an underscore at the end.